Atlantis and Lemuria. This video aims at presenting writings that reconstruct events between the origin of the Earth and the beginning of recorded history and include a core investigation of the origins, achievements and fate of the Atlanteans and Lemurians. These remarkable lost brute races developed the first concepts of good and evil, manipulated the forces of nature, laid the groundwork of all human legal and ethical systems, and defined and nurtured the distinctive yet complementary powers of men and women that brought humankind, many centuries ago, to its highest artistic, intellectual, and spiritual attainments. The subject matter pertains to the social, economic, cultural, etc. life of ancient times. The method of obtaining information is responsible investigative technique. Part 1. Atlantis and Lemuria from History and Akashic Records. As we know that only a small part of prehistoric human experience can be learnt by the methods of ordinary history. Historic evidence throws light on only a few thousand years, and even what archaeology, paleontology, and geology can teach us is very limited. Added to this limitation is the untrustworthiness which attaches to everything based upon external evidence. We need only consider how the presentation of some event, even if comparatively recent, or connected with a nation, is totally transformed on the discovery of new historic evidence. We need but compare the descriptions given by different historians of one and the same thing in order to realize at once how insecure is the ground on which we stand. Everything belonging to the outer world of sense is subject to time, and time destroys what in time arises. Now, external history depends on what has been preserved to us in time, and no one, dependent only on external evidence, can even say whether that which has been preserved is true. But everything which arises in time has its origin in the eternal, and although the eternal is not accessible to sense perception, the paths that lead to a perception of the eternal are available to man. In these two books it has been shown that at a certain high stage of knowledge man can even penetrate to the everlasting sources that underlie the passing things of time. If a person in the way described has developed his power to know, then, as regards knowledge of the past, he is no longer restricted entirely to outer evidence. In all mystic schools there actually exists such history and prehistory, and such absolute agreement has reigned here for thousands of years that it is impossible to compare it with the agreement existing among ordinary historians even for a century. Initiates describe at all times and in all places essentially the same thing. At the outset those facts will be described which occurred during the existence of the so-called continent of Atlantis, which lay between America and Europe. This part of the surface of our Earth was at one time land. Today it is this land which forms the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Plato still told of the last remnant of this land, the island of Poseidonis, lying to the west of Europe and Africa. In the little book, The Story of Atlantis, by W. Scott Elliott, the reader will learn that the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean was once a continent, that for about 1 million years it was the scene of a civilization certainly very different from ours of today, and that the last remnant of this continent was submerged nearly 10,000 years BC. Details completing those given in that book, and bearing on this civilization, will be given here. While the outward events of the life of these our Atlantean forefathers are more conspicuously the subject of description in the above work, something will here be said of the soul life, and of the inner nature of the conditions under which they lived. One must therefore go back in thought to a period lying more than 10,000 years behind us, and to a civilization which had existed for many thousands of years. What is here related, however, took place not only on the continent submerged by the waters of the Atlantic Ocean, but also in the neighboring regions that now form Asia, Africa, Europe, and America, and what subsequently happened in these regions was evolved out of that earlier civilization. As to the sources of the information to be given here, I am for the present obliged to be silent. He who knows anything at all about such sources will understand why this must be so, but circumstances may arise which will make it possible to speak on this subject very shortly. How much of the knowledge lying hidden in the womb of the theosophical movement may gradually be communicated, depends altogether on the attitude of our contemporaries. Next part will discuss information about our Atlantean forefathers.